The last nurse who sat with a dying giant. What the giant whispered in the final hour in 1902. She came in with a tin basin and a clean rag, not knowing she was walking toward the end of an age. Her name was Margaret Kettle, though the orderlies called her Maggie. 47 years old, twice widowed, childless, with hands that had learned silence in a dozen fever wards and one makeshift surgery in a Transvaal barn. By 1902, she had stopped expecting anything from the dying except the truth. The truth was usually small, a name misremembered, a curse, a swallowed apology. She washed faces anyway. The hospital was not a hospital. It was a converted warehouse near the Southampton docks, pressed into service for the broken bodies, coming back from a finished war. The Boer War had ended that spring, but the dying had not read the newspapers. They arrived on filthy transports, men yellow with typhoid, men with lungs that whistled like cracked flutes, men who had lost half a face to a Mauser and still tried to speak. Maggie worked the night shift because night shifts meant fewer surgeons asking for things. She was called to bed 14 just after 11 on a damp October evening. The gas lights hissed low. Rain tapped the high windows like 1,000 small fingers. "He's asking for a woman," the young ward sister said. Sister Rigby was barely 23, all starch and efficiency, but her voice had dropped to something near a whisper. "Not just a nurse, a woman. He said to send the oldest one." Maggie did not blink. "That's me." "You aren't afraid of him?" "I'm afraid of the supper they served tonight." "Show me the bed." Bed 14 was at the far end of the ward, half hidden by a frayed cotton screen that had once been white. Two orderlies stood outside it, and Maggie noticed they stood with their arms crossed and their eyes fixed on the floor. Not watching the patient, avoiding him. She pushed the screen aside. The giant filled the bed like a fallen tree fills a stream. His feet hung over the iron footboard. His shoulders touched both side rails. Even lying down, he seemed too large for the room. Too large for the century, perhaps. His face was a ruin of gray skin and black stubble. His eyes were closed, but his chest moved with a slow, terrible effort, each breath a small act of engineering. Maggie set her basin on the nightstand. She wrung out the rag, then she sat down in the hard wooden chair beside him and waited. She did not speak first. That was her rule. The dying speak when they are ready and not a moment before. The rain continued. A man 2 beds over coughed something wet into a handkerchief. Somewhere down the corridor, a cartwheel squeaked. After a long while, the giant opened his eyes. They were pale blue, the color of skimmed milk, and they held no fear. That surprised her. Most of them were terrified by the end, not of death itself, but of the small humiliations that preceded it. The giant looked at her with the calm of a man who had already counted every cost. "You're the old one," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones turning in a deep river. "Good." "I'm Maggie," she said. "I'll sit with you." "I know what sitting means." He swallowed with difficulty. "It means you won't run." "I never run." A pause. He studied her face, not rudely, but thoroughly, as if memorizing a map. Then he said, "I'm not a soldier." "I didn't think you were." "What did you think?" She considered the question. "I thought you were a man who needs a clean face and someone to hear what he says." The giant almost smiled. The corner of his mouth twitched, but the smile did not arrive. "You're honest." "Honesty costs nothing at this hour." "No," he agreed. "Nothing costs anything at this hour. That's the terrible freedom of it." He closed his eyes again. Maggie dipped the rag in the basin. The water was still warm, and began to wash his face. She started at his forehead, moving in slow, gentle circles. He did not flinch. His skin was hot, not with fever, but with some deeper heat, as if his body were burning its own fuel just to keep him conscious. She washed his temples, the hollows beneath his cheekbones, the massive jaw. She washed his neck where a pulse beat like a distant drum. She did not speak. When she finished, she set the rag aside and folded her hands in her lap. "I was born in 1835, the giant said suddenly. His eyes were still closed. In a crofter's hut on the Isle of Skye, I was the seventh son of a seventh son, which means nothing, except that people expected nonsense from me. They got nonsense, but not the kind they wanted. Maggie said nothing. I grew fast, he continued. By 12, I was taller than any man in the parish. By 15, I could lift a full-grown sheep with one arm. The minister said I was touched by God. The blacksmith said I was touched by the devil. I said nothing because I had not yet learned to speak in a way that mattered. He opened his eyes again and looked at the ceiling. Do you know what it is to be a giant, nurse? Not the stories, not the circuses, the real thing. Tell me, she said. You are never alone, he said. Not because people love you, because they cannot stop looking at you. On the street, in the church, at the dinner table. Every eye slides toward you. They whisper, they calculate. Could he lift that? Could he crush that? Would he fit through that door? I have spent 67 years being a question that no one dares ask aloud. He paused, breathing heavily. Maggie waited. I left Skye when I was 19, he said. Went to Glasgow. Worked the docks. They paid me double because I could carry what 3 men could not. I did not ask for double. I asked to be left alone. They would not leave me alone. They came to stare. They brought their children to stare. One man, a foreman named Galloway, offered me 6pence to lift a crate of nails over my head and hold it there while he timed it with his pocket watch. Did you do it? I lifted the crate, the giant said. Then I set it down on his foot. Not hard, just enough to make him hop. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. He did not offer me 6pence again, the giant said, but he also did not stop staring. None of them ever stopped staring. That is the curse. You are a spectacle from birth to death, and death is the first time they look away. The rain strengthened. Water ran down the windows in sheets. Maggie reached for the rag again, wrung it out, and dabbed his lower lip, which was cracked and bleeding. I have seen things, the giant whispered. Not the things they write in books. The things that happen in the dark, between the moments that history pretends to remember. I was at the Great Exhibition in 1851. I stood in the Crystal Palace and watched 100,000 people walk past wonders they did not deserve. I saw a woman sell her wedding ring for a loaf of bread in the Irish famine, not in a story but in a mud lane outside Killarney, with my own eyes. I watched a child die of the croup in a workhouse while a chaplain read verses about mercy. Do you know what the child said? 4 years old. She said, "The dark is heavy." Maggie's hands stilled. I carried that child to the dead house myself, the giant said. The matron told me not to. I carried her anyway. She weighed nothing. That was the worst part. A human life, used up, and all that remained was something lighter than a wet coat. He was weeping now, not loudly. The tears simply leaked from the corners of his milk-pale eyes and ran down the gray ruin of his cheeks. Maggie did not wipe them away. Tears were not dirt. You are wondering why I asked for the oldest nurse, he said. I assumed you wanted someone who wouldn't faint. He laughed, a single, broken sound. No, I wanted someone who has already buried her illusions. Young nurses still believe they can save everyone. They work themselves into exhaustion and then into bitterness. You have already learned the only truth that matters at a bedside. What truth is that? That you cannot hold back the dark. You can only sit beside it. Maggie considered this. She had never put it into words herself, but yes, that was the shape of her life. 2 husbands dead, one of a fever, one of a fall from a scaffold. A dozen patients lost each winter. The dark was not an enemy. It was simply the other side of the room. I have a name, the giant said. Not the one they gave me, the one I gave myself. What is it? Tomas. I chose it when I was 22, after I read a book about a man who walked 1,000 miles to see the ocean. I have never seen the ocean, not properly. I have seen harbors and ports and the gray chop of the channel. But the real ocean, the one that goes on forever, without walls or wards or people staring, I have never seen it. He turned his head on the thin pillow. His eyes found hers. Will you do something for me, Maggie? If I can. When I'm gone, go to the coast. Any coast. Brighton, Dover. It does not matter. Go at dawn. Look at the water. Do not speak. Just look. And then say my name once. Tomas. So that I am there in that way. A ghost of a name over the water. Maggie nodded. I will. You are not promising to make me feel better. No. I am promising to do the thing. The giant, Tomas, nodded slowly. Good. That is good. Lies are for the healthy. The dying need only the smallest truth delivered plainly. They sat in silence for a long time. The ward settled around them. The coughing man stopped coughing. The squeaking cart went still. Even the rain seemed to soften, as if the world outside understood that something was ending. Maggie checked his pulse. It was thready and strange, not weak but irregular, like a clock with a broken gear. I have carried 23 coffins in my life, Thomas said. Men, women, children. I carried them not because I was asked, but because I was the only one strong enough to do it without help. The undertaker in Glasgow called me his gentle giant. He meant it as a compliment. I accepted it as a sentence. Why a sentence? Because gentle and giant are not supposed to live in the same body. A giant is meant to be terrible. A gentle man is meant to be small. I have spent my whole life being an impossibility. People do not know what to do with an impossibility. They smile at you, they step backward, they buy you drinks and then whisper to their friends about what you might do if you became angry. He closed his eyes again. His breathing changed, slower, more deliberate, as if he were savoring each breath like the last sip of a good wine. I was angry once, he said. Only once in 1867. A man in a pub called me a freak. I did not hit him. I lifted his table, with his drink still on it, and set it on the bar 6 feet away. Then I walked out. That was my violence. A table moved 3 yards. Maggie smiled again, more fully this time. That's the most English rage I've ever heard. I am not English, Tomas said, and for the first time there was a hint of fire in his voice. I am Scottish. There is a difference. The English build empires. The Scottish build walls and wait for the empires to fall. And the Irish bury everyone, he said. They have had the most practice. It was past midnight now. Maggie lit a small candle on the nightstand. The gaslight was too harsh, too eager. Candlelight understood dying. It flickered and consented to the dark. I am going to tell you something now, Tomas whispered, something I have never told another living soul. Not because I was ashamed, because there was no one to tell it to. No one who would believe it, and no one who would forget it in the right way. Maggie leaned closer. Her shoulder touched the iron bedrail. In 1879, he said, I was working on a fishing boat out of Liverpool. A bad season. The herring had gone deep and the skippers were desperate. One night we were caught in a storm. Not the worst I have seen, but bad enough. The waves broke over the bow like falling buildings. The captain lost his nerve. He began to pray, not quietly but shouting, as if God were hard of hearing. He stopped. His throat moved. I went to the rail to secure a line, he said. A wave hit the boat broadside. The deck tilted. I lost my footing and went over the side. Maggie did not gasp. She had heard 1,000 stories of near drowning. But something in his voice made her wait. I did not sink, Thomas said. That was the strange thing. I am a large man, heavy, solid. I should have dropped like a stone. But something caught me. Not a rope, not a net. Something soft and immense and cold. It lifted me, held me, carried me through the water like a mother carrying a child. He opened his eyes. They were wide now, and the milk-pale blue had darkened to the color of a winter sky before snow. I looked down, he said. The water should have been black. It was not black. It was full of light. A green light, deep and slow like lightning trapped in amber. And in the light, I saw, his voice failed. He closed his eyes again, and for a terrible moment, Maggie thought he had died mid-sentence, but his chest rose. His hand, massive and raw-knuckled, found the edge of the blanket and gripped it. I saw faces, he whispered. Not human faces, not fish, something older, long and pale and patient. They looked at me without eyes. They touched me without hands, and they spoke to me without a mouth. What did they say? Maggie asked. Her own voice had dropped to match his. They said, "You will be the last one who remembers us." That was all. Then the light faded, and I was floating on my back 100 yards from the boat, and the storm was over. The sea was flat as a looking glass. Maggie said nothing. She had heard dying men say strange things, had heard a feverish soldier describe the walls of Johannesburg turning into singing trees, had heard a girl of 16 whisper that her dead mother was standing at the foot of the bed holding a cup of tea. The brain did strange things at the end, but this man was not feverish. His brow was cool under her fingers. I did not tell anyone, Tomas said. I told myself it was a dream. A man does not fall into the North Atlantic in a gale and see luminous faces. A man drowns, or he is rescued by a lifeboat. There are only two possibilities. I knew this. I am not a superstitious man. I have never prayed, not once after that night, because what would be the point? I had already seen something that prayer could not explain and could not erase. You believe you saw them, Maggie said. It was not a question. I believe I saw something, he said, and I believe that something has been waiting all these years for me to do something with it, but I have done nothing. I worked the docks, I carried coffins, I moved tables 6 feet. I lived a small life in a large body, and now I am dying in a warehouse by the sea, and I have never told anyone the truth. He turned his head on the pillow. His eyes found hers again, and this time they were not calm. They were hungry, not for life, but for witness. You are the last nurse, he said. Do you understand? There will be others after you, other women with basins and rags, but you are the last one who will sit with me, and I am the last giant. Not the last tall man, the last one who saw the faces in the water. When I go, that scene goes with me, unless I give it to you. Maggie felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not pity, but a kind of recognition, as if she had been walking toward this bed for 47 years without knowing it. Give it to me, she said. Tomas reached up with his right hand. It trembled. She took it. Both her hands could not cover his palm, and held it against her own chest. Lean close, he said. Closer. She bent until her ear was an inch from his mouth. What he whispered then took nearly an hour. He spoke of the deep places, the trenches in the ocean that had never seen sunlight. He spoke of creatures that had lived before the first fish crawled on the land. Not monsters, but witnesses. Silent, patient. They had watched empires rise and fall from below. They had watched the ice come and go. They had watched ships sink and sailors drown. And they had felt something that might have been grief, if grief could exist without a word for it. They are not gods, he whispered. They are not angels. They are not devils. They are simply old. Older than memory. Older than language. They have no names because they have never needed names. But they have a purpose. What purpose? Maggie breathed. To remember, he said. That is all. To remember what the surface forgets. Every death, every birth, every whispered word that falls into the water, they keep it. Not in a book. Not in a mind like ours. In something else. Something we do not have a word for. A keeping. His voice grew softer, thinner, like a candle burning low. The night I fell into the sea, he said, they did not save me because I was special. They saved me because I was large, because my body could hold more memory than a smaller man's. They put something into me that night, a seed, a spark. I have carried it for 23 years, and I have never known what to do with it. But now I am dying, and the seed needs a new ground. Maggie felt his hand tighten on hers. You, he said, you are not large, but you are strong in a different way. You have sat beside the dying for 20 years. You have heard things that would crack a smaller soul. You can carry this. I believe you can carry this. Carry what? The remembering, he said. Not all of it. Just the piece that belongs to me. My piece of the deep. What I saw, what I felt, what I failed to do with it. If you do not take it, it dies with me. And the faces in the water will have to wait another 1,000 years for another giant. And I do not want them to wait. Maggie did not understand half of what he was saying, but she understood this. A dying man was asking her to receive something. The content did not matter. The act did. I'll carry it, she said. You have to mean it, he said. Not because you are kind, because it is true. It is true. Tomas exhaled. His whole body seemed to soften, as if a string that had been pulled tight for 67 years had finally been cut. Then put your forehead against mine, he said, and do not speak until I am gone. She did. She leaned forward, careful not to press her weight against his chest, and touched her brow to his. His skin was cool now. The heat had gone somewhere else. He whispered for another 20 minutes. The words were not English. They were not Gaelic or any language she recognized. They were sounds like stones turning in a current, like water moving over ice, like the wind through a cave that had no end. She did not try to understand them. She simply received them, let them pass through her skin and settle somewhere behind her breastbone. At some point, his whispering stopped. At some point, his hand went slack in hers. At some point, the rain stopped too, and the ward fell into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. She stayed with her forehead against his for a long time. Long enough that Sister Rigby came to the screen and looked in, then withdrew without a word. Long enough that the candle burned down to a stub and sputtered out. When she finally sat up, the first gray light of dawn was showing through the high windows. Tomas was dead. His face had smoothed. The ruin of gray skin looked almost peaceful, and the black stubble seemed less like neglect and more like a forest at rest. Maggie sat for a while longer. Then she picked up her basin, wrung out the cold rag, and folded it neatly over the side. She straightened the blanket over his chest. She did not close his eyes. The dead deserved to face whatever was coming without interference. She walked out of the ward, down the corridor, past the orderlies who still would not look at bed 14, and out into the Southampton dawn. She did not go home. She walked to the docks, to the water's edge, where the gray October sea lapped against oily pilings. She stood there for a long time, watching the light spread across the water like a slow answer to a question she had not known she was asking. Then she said very quietly, "Tomas." The water did not change. No faces appeared. No green light rose from the deep. But something in her chest, something that had not been there the night before, stirred. Just once, like a seed turning toward the dark. She went home. She washed her hands. She slept for 4 hours. And at dusk, she went back to the ward to sit with the next dying man, who was small and afraid and asked her nothing except to hold his hand. She held it. And somewhere in the deep, the old ones kept their silence and their patience, knowing that their remembering had not ended after all. The Keeping, Southampton, October 1902 to November 1903. She did not sleep well after Thomas died. That was not unusual. Maggie Kettle had spent 20 years sleeping badly, the kind of half-sleep where you keep one ear open for a bell, a cry, a sudden silence. But this was different. This was not the alertness of a nurse. This was the wakefulness of someone who had been given a thing she did not know how to hold. The seed Thomas spoke of, if it was a seed, had lodged itself somewhere behind her ribs. Not painfully, not even noticeably during the day, but at night when the ward went quiet and the gas lights were turned down to their lowest blue flame, she felt it, a small warmth, a small weight, as if she had swallowed a thimbleful of honey and it had decided to stay. She told no one. There was no one to tell. Her fellow nurses were good women, practical, tired, devout in a distant way, but they did not speak of luminous faces or deep sea keepers. They spoke of suppers and schedules, and which surgeon had been drinking again. Maggie listened, nodded, and kept her silence. But she began to change, slowly, in ways that surprised even her. First, she started going to the water. Not every day. She could not afford the time. But once a week, sometimes twice, she would walk to the docks after her shift ended and stand at the edge of the pier until the tide turned. She did not pray. She did not speak. She simply stood, and the water stood opposite her, and something passed between them that she could not name. Second, she began to remember things that were not her memories. It started small, a smell, salt, tar, and something older, like wet stone deep underground. A sound, not the harbor's clatter, but a low, slow pulse, like a heart the size of a cathedral beating once a minute. A taste, cold, clean, metallic, at the back of her throat when she woke in the dark. She told herself it was imagination, grief playing tricks, the mind's way of making sense of a strange death. But then the faces began to appear. Not in the water, in her dreams. They were not human. They were long and pale, with skin that shimmered like oil on a wet street. They had no eyes, but they saw her. They had no mouths, but they spoke. Not in words, in pressure, in temperature, in the way the air changed when a storm is coming. You are not the giant, they said without saying, but you are the one who sat beside him. That is enough. Maggie woke from these dreams with her hands cold and her heart quiet. She did not scream. She did not pray. She washed her face, dressed in her starched uniform, and went to work. The winter ward. The winter of 1902 was cruel. The warehouse hospital filled faster than the orderlies could clean the beds. Men came in off the transports with frostbite and pneumonia, with wounds that had never properly healed, with coughs that rattled like chains in a dry well. Maggie worked double shifts. She held hands. She changed dressings. She sat with 3 dying men in a single night, and each time she whispered the same thing. You are not alone. I am here. I will stay. She did not know if it helped. She did it anyway. But a new thing had entered her work. When she sat beside the dying, she began to hear, not with her ears, but with that seed place behind her ribs, the things they did not say, the shape of their silences, the weight of what they were carrying into the dark. A young soldier, 19, Welsh, with a face full of freckles, died in her arms on the 3rd of December. He had been shot in the belly at a place called Roy Cop, and the surgeons had done what they could, which was not enough. He died whispering a name. Maggie thought it was a girl's name, but as he went, as his breath slowed and stopped, she felt the seed in her chest vibrate once, like a struck bell, and she understood. The name was not a girl. It was a dog, a small brown dog he had left behind in Cardiff when he was 17, and foolish, and thought war would make him a man. She carried that knowledge for 3 days before she found a chaplain going to Cardiff and asked him quietly to find the dog. The chaplain thought she was mad. He went anyway. The dog was alive, living with the soldier's mother. The chaplain wrote a letter, and the mother wrote back. And somewhere in the frozen ground of South Wales, a small brown dog slept by a fire, unaware that a dead boy had whispered her name into the ear of a nurse who had learned to listen. Maggie did not tell anyone about the bell. The second giant. In January, a man was brought in who filled bed 7 the way Tomas had filled bed 14. He was not as tall, only 6'4", but he was broad, so broad that his shoulders hung over the sides of the mattress like bread rising over the rim of a pan. His name was Daniel McRae, and he was a blacksmith from Dundee. He had come to Southampton to see his son off to India, caught a fever on the docks, and collapsed at the train station. "You're not my nurse," he said, when Maggie approached his bed with her basin and rag. His voice was a rasp, but the size of it, even sick, even dying, made the glass in the window tremble. "I'm whoever sits beside you," she said. "Does that trouble you?" He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a wet, crackling sound that turned into a cough. "You're small," he said. "I'm aware." "No," he said. "You're small the way a key is small. You open things." Maggie did not know what to say to that. She washed his face. Daniel McRae did not die quickly. He lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of fevers and sweats and strange lucid intervals when he would talk about the forge, the heat, the rhythm, the way iron softened when you gave it exactly what it needed and no more. Maggie listened. She learned that a blacksmith's hands are never clean, that the smell of hot metal stays in the skin for decades, that a man who has shaped a horseshoe for a king's horse and a nail for a pauper's coffin understands something about humility that no priest can teach. She also learned that Daniel McRae was dying of something the doctors could not name. Not the fever that came and went. Something deeper. Something in the marrow, they said. His body was eating itself from the inside, and no amount of broth or prayer could stop it. One night, when the fever was low and the ward was still, Daniel reached out and caught her wrist. His grip was astonishingly gentle for a man who had spent 40 years swinging a hammer. "You saw him, didn't you?" he said. "The other one, the big one, bed 14. Maggie went still. "Yes." "He was bigger than me." "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "Good. I'd have hated to be the biggest. That's a loneliness I don't want." He released her wrist and closed his eyes. "He told me something," Daniel said after a long pause. "The big one, before he died. I didn't understand it then. I think I understand it now." Maggie waited. He said, "The water remembers what the land forgets." I thought he was raving. Men rave at the end. But then the fever took me, and I saw something. Green light, faces, no eyes. "Do you know what I'm talking about?" Maggie's throat tightened. "Yes." "They told me to find you," Daniel whispered. "The faces. They said, 'Find the small one. She carries the seed now. Tell her this. The keeping is not a burden. The keeping is a permission.'" He stopped. His breathing grew shallow. "I don't know what that means," he said. "I'm just a blacksmith. I hit things. But I promised them I would tell you. So I'm telling you. And now I'm done." He died at dawn with his hand still around her wrist. Maggie sat with him until the rigor began to set in. Then she gently freed herself, closed his eyes, and walked to the water. The docks were frozen that morning. Ice had formed in thin plates along the pilings, and the gulls stood on it with their feet tucked up, regarding her with small black eyes. Maggie stood at the edge and looked out at the gray-white sea. "The keeping is not a burden. The keeping is a permission." She repeated the words to herself, tasting them. Permission for what? To remember? To sit? To open things as Daniel had said, the way a small key opens a large lock? She did not know, but the seed in her chest pulsed once, warm, patient, and she understood that she did not need to know. Not yet. Knowing would come later, or it would not come at all, and either way, the work was the same. She went back to the ward. The plague of dreams. March brought rain. April brought more rain. May brought the first warm days and a sudden influx of men from a troop ship that had been held in quarantine at Gibraltar. Typhoid. 6 beds filled in one afternoon. Maggie worked until her feet bled and her hands cracked. The dreams grew stronger. She saw the deep places now with terrible clarity. Not just the faces, the long, pale, eyeless faces, but the world they inhabited. A world of slow currents and colder colds, of mountains that were not mountains but the bones of ancient whales, of forests that were not forests but gardens of white coral that had been growing since before the first ape stood upright. The faces spoke to her in these dreams, not in words, in images, in feelings. They showed her a Roman ship sinking off the coast of Gaul in 42 BC. They showed her the bodies of the sailors, 43 men, some still chained to the oars, drifting down into the dark, and they showed her how they had received those bodies, not as food but as memories. They had kept the sailor's last thoughts, the taste of wine, the name of a child left behind, the terror of drowning, and the strange peace that came after. They showed her a Viking longboat, broken in a storm, and a boy of 12 who had been lashed to the mast. The boy did not drown, he froze, and in his final moments, He had sung a song, a lullaby his mother had sung to him in a language that no longer exists on any land. The faces had kept that song. They had kept it for 1,000 years. They were still keeping it. We do not judge, the faces showed her. We do not save. We do not condemn. We simply hold. When the surface forgets, when the last person who remembers a song, a face, a name, a fear has died and turned to dust, we are still here. We are the floor beneath the floor, the dark beneath the dark. Maggie woke from these dreams with tears on her face and no memory of crying. She began to keep a notebook, a small leather thing, bought from a stationer on the high street for sixpence. She wrote down everything she remembered from the dreams, the images, the feelings, the fragments. She did not know why. She only knew that if she did not write them, they would press against her ribs until she could not breathe. By June, the notebook was full. She bought another. The visit. In July, a woman came to the hospital. She was old, older than Maggie, older than anyone Maggie had ever seen. Her hair was white and thin, pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her forehead. Her eyes were the color of slate. Her hands were twisted with arthritis, but she carried herself like a woman who had never asked for help and never intended to start. She appeared at the ward door at noon, when the sun was high and the orderlies were eating their dinner. Sister Rigby tried to turn her away. The woman said something too quietly for Maggie to hear, and Sister Rigby went pale and stepped aside. The woman walked directly to Maggie. "You sat with Angus," she said. "I've sat with many," Maggie said. "I don't know an Angus." "You would remember him. He was 7 feet 4 inches, born on the Isle of Skye, died in this warehouse in October. You washed his face." Maggie's heart stopped, not slowed, stopped, then started again. Faster. "Thomas," she said. "He called himself Thomas." The old woman smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had outlasted everything: husbands, children, wars, hope itself, and found something hard and clear on the other side. "Thomas was his name for strangers," the old woman said. "Angus was his name for the water. I am his mother." Maggie stared. "His mother would be. You would be over 90 years old." "94, the woman said. "I had him when I was 47. His father was a giant too. They said I would die in childbirth. Instead I lived, and he lived, and now I am the only one left." She sat down on the edge of an empty bed, her twisted hands folded in her lap. "He wrote to me," she said, "every week for 40 years. Every week a letter. And in every letter he told me the same thing. 'Mother,' he said, 'I saw them again. The faces, they are waiting. They are patient. But they are not eternal. Nothing is eternal, not even the deep. They need someone to carry their remembering when they are gone.'" Maggie felt the seed in her chest pulse so hard she put a hand over her ribs. "You're the one," the old woman said. It was not a question. "I don't know what that means," Maggie said. "I'm a nurse. I wash faces. I hold hands. I don't—" "You don't believe in giants?" "I believe in men who are very tall and very lonely." The old woman laughed. It was a dry, cracked sound, like paper burning. "That's the same thing, girl. That's exactly the same thing." She reached out with one arthritic hand and took Maggie's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Angus told me in his last letter, the one that came after he died, because the post is slow and he always mailed them early. He told me he had found you, the old nurse, the one who would sit. He said, 'Mother, she has no idea what she is. That's the best part. She thinks she is ordinary. She thinks she is small. But the water sees her. The deep knows her. She is the door.'" Maggie shook her head. "I'm not a door. I'm a woman who needs to change a dressing on bed 3. "Then go change it," the old woman said. "But first, take this." She pressed something into Maggie's palm. A stone. Small, smooth, dark green, with a single streak of white running through it like lightning. "He found that on the beach when he was 7 years old," the old woman said. He carried it in his pocket for 60 years. He wanted you to have it. He said, tell her to hold it when the dreams are too much. The stone remembers the sea. It will remind her that she is not alone. Maggie looked down at the stone. It was warm from the old woman's hand. Or perhaps it was warm from something else. I have to go, the old woman said, standing. She swayed once, caught herself, and walked toward the door. She did not look back. Wait, Maggie said. What's your name? The old woman paused at the threshold. I don't have a name that matters anymore, she said. But once a giant called me mother. That was enough. She left. Maggie stood holding the stone for a long time. Then she put it in her pocket, picked up her basin, and went to change the dressing on bed 3. The fading. The seed grew. That was the only way Maggie could describe it. The warmth behind her ribs spread slowly through the autumn of 1902 and into the winter of 1903. It did not hurt, but it changed her. She began to know things before they happened. Not grand things, battles, disasters, the fall of empires. Small things. Which patient would die before morning? Which patient would recover against all odds? Which orderly was about to quit? Which sister was hiding a whiskey bottle in her locker? She did not use this knowledge. She simply held it, the way the faces in the deep held the memories of drowned sailors. She held it without judgment, without interference. But some knowledge could not be held quietly. One night in February, she was sitting with a young man named Edward, a corporal from a town called Maidstone. He had lost his left leg below the knee to a shell at a place called Hartsbeesfontein, and the stump had gone bad. The surgeons had taken more leg and more, and now there was almost nothing left, and the infection had reached his blood. He was dying, and he knew it, and he was terrified. I don't want to go into the dark, he whispered. His voice was thin as a thread. I'm not afraid of God. I'm afraid of the dark. The dark is heavy. Maggie went cold. Those were the words. The child in the Irish famine. The child who had died in the workhouse while a chaplain read verses about mercy. Thomas had told her that story. Thomas had carried that child. And now, 30 years later, a dying corporal from Maidstone was saying the same words. The dark is heavy. She took his hand. The dark is not an enemy, she said. It is a keeper. It holds what the light cannot. When you go into it, you will not be alone. There are faces there. Old ones. They have no eyes, but they see you. They have no mouths, but they will speak your name in a way that does not need sound. They have been waiting for you. Edward stared at her. His fever-bright eyes widened. How do you know that? He whispered. Because a giant told me, she said, and because I have seen it, not with my eyes, with something else. The dark is not empty. It is the fullest thing there is. Edward died 3 hours later. His hand went slack in hers, but his face was peaceful, as if he had recognized something in the dark that he had been afraid to name. Maggie closed his eyes and walked to the water. The February sea was black and restless. No moon, no stars. The wind came off the channel like a blade. She stood at the edge of the pier, the green stone in her pocket warm against her hip, and she spoke aloud for the first time since Thomas died. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. I don't know why you chose me. I'm not a giant. I'm not special. I'm a nurse. I wash faces. I hold hands. That's all. The water did not answer, but the seed in her chest pulsed. Once, twice, 3 times. And she felt for just a moment what the faces felt, the weight of 10,000 years of memory. The slow, patient work of holding what the surface kept losing, the loneliness, the purpose, the strange, terrible love of it. She began to weep, not from grief, from recognition. The last hour reprise. In November of 1903, 13 months after Thomas died, Maggie was called to bed 19. The patient was a woman. That was unusual. The warehouse hospital was for soldiers, and soldiers were men. But the war had left behind other bodies, camp followers, laundresses, nurses, the odd wife who had refused to be left behind. This woman had been found on a transport ship, half dead of scurvy and tuberculosis, with no papers and no name. She had been in the hospital for 8 weeks, tucked away in a corner, too far gone to be moved. Now she was dying. Maggie sat down beside her. The woman was small, smaller than Maggie, which was saying something. Her face was a map of suffering. Her hands were claws. But her eyes, when she opened them, were the clearest blue Maggie had ever seen. Not pale like Thomas's. Clear. Like water over white sand. "You're the one," the woman whispered. Her voice was a ruin, but the words were certain. "The one what?" Maggie asked. "The one who sits, the one who carries, the one who was given the seed." Maggie went very still. "How do you know that?" The woman smiled. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, but the smile was real. "Because I am one of them," she said. "Not a giant, not a keeper, something else, something in between. I was born on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. My mother was a whaler's wife. My father was the sea." Maggie did not laugh. She did not call for a chaplain. She simply waited. "I have lived 42 years on land," the woman said, "and I have never belonged here. The air is too thin. The light is too bright. The sounds are too loud. But I stayed because I was needed. There are others like me, scattered, hidden, forgotten. We are the ones who walk between, who carry messages from the deep to the surface, who find the ones like you, like me. The carriers," the woman said, "the ones who can hold the seed. Giants are born once in a generation, but carriers can be made, chosen, trained. You were not born to this, Maggie Kettle. You were chosen. When you sat with Angus, with Thomas, you did not just receive his seed, you accepted it. That is the difference between a vessel and a gravestone. A gravestone holds what is dead. A vessel holds what is still growing." Maggie's hand went to her chest. The seed pulsed, warm, alive. "What am I supposed to do with it?" she whispered. The dying woman took a long, rattling breath. "Sit," she said. "That's all. Sit beside the dying. Hold their hands. Wash their faces. Listen to what they whisper. And then, remember, write it down if you must. Speak it aloud if you can. But do not let it vanish. The faces in the deep cannot hold everything forever. They are old. They are tired. They need help. Help from a nurse in Southampton? Help from 1,000 nurses in 1,000 cities," the woman said. "From mothers and fathers and children. From anyone who will sit still long enough to hear what the dying are really saying. The giants are almost gone. The old ones are fading. But the small ones, the key-shaped ones, there are millions of you. You just don't know it yet." She coughed. Blood speckled her lips. "Tell them," she whispered. "Tell the others. Not in a sermon, not in a book, in the way you wash a face, in the way you hold a hand. That is the only sermon that matters." Her eyes closed. Maggie sat with her for 3 hours. She died just before dawn, and as she went, the seed in Maggie's chest swelled to twice its size. Not painfully, like a lung filling with air, like a heart remembering how to beat. Maggie Kettle lived another 31 years. She never left nursing. She worked through the Great War, through the influenza pandemic of 1918, through the strikes and the shortages and the slow, strange peace that followed. She trained dozens of younger nurses. And though she never spoke openly about the seed or the faces or the giants, something passed from her hands to theirs. A way of sitting, a way of listening, a way of holding the dying that was not quite like anyone else's. She kept the green stone in her pocket until the day she died. She kept the notebooks in a trunk under her bed, wrapped in oilcloth tied with black ribbon. She added to them for 30 years, hundreds of deaths, thousands of whispered words, the things the dying said when they thought no one was listening or when they knew someone was listening, and that was exactly what they needed. She never saw the faces again, not in dreams, not in the water. But she felt them sometimes on still nights, when the ward was quiet and the sea was calm. A pressure, a warmth, a sense that she was not alone, that she had never been alone, that the keeping was not a burden but a permission. She died in 1934 in the same warehouse that had been converted into a permanent nursing home. She was 81 years old. She died in her sleep with the green stone in her hand and a half-finished notebook on her chest. The nurses who found her said her face was peaceful, younger, somehow, as if she had seen something on the other side that had made her remember a joke she had forgotten. They buried her in the churchyard of St. Mary's, Southampton, with a simple stone. The stone said, Margaret Kettle, nurse, 1853 to 1934. She sat with the dying. The dying sat with her. They did not know about the seed. They did not know about Thomas, or the faces, or the green stone, or the notebooks in the trunk under her bed. But one of the younger nurses, a girl named Elsie, who had been trained by Maggie herself, found the trunk 2 days after the funeral. She sat on the floor of Maggie's empty room and read the notebooks by candlelight, weeping sometimes, laughing sometimes, and mostly sitting very still with her hand over her heart, feeling something she had never felt before. A warmth, a small warmth, behind her ribs. She did not tell anyone, but the next time she sat with a dying man, she took his hand, and she did not let go until the end. Somewhere in the deep, the old ones felt the seed take root in a new ground. They did not rejoice, they did not mourn, they simply kept keeping, patient as stone, patient as water, patient as the dark that holds everything the light forgets. And the dark, for once, was not heavy. It was full.